E mana, iwi na waka e rara tira mā tihe Māori ora tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tata katoa. So brief me, just e na mana, just recognise the strength and the dignity and essence of each person in the room, and iwi, recognise your families and the history of your families. E na waka, I recognise the journey that you made to get here. E rara tira mā, we recognise you as leaders, person in the room. Tihe Māori ora, together, it's great life. Tēnā koutou, welcome, because it's really important we say it 3 times. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tata katoa. So it really is great to have you all here today, and just thanks to NZTE for organising and leading, taking us out to different parts of New Zealand. And what I would say just at the very outset, this has probably been the most intense 18 months of my entire working life. I think it probably has for most people in the room. It hasn't all been bad either. It's been an incredible sort of leadership challenge. But one particularly gratifying part of that challenge is just the way that people have worked together. So the level of collaboration has been absolutely amazing. On the bottom of that banner there, you see all the different government agencies involved, historic levels of cooperation amongst the agencies as we pursued the mission, but also with the private sector as well. I think Export New Zealand here today, somewhere, Catherine Beard, absolutely extraordinary sort of digging in and really good collaboration there. And the ministers, I'm not just saying that because the ministers here, but they've been absolutely fantastic, worked every single hour that God gave them, and they've really stepped into the whole equation. So overall, it's been a pretty intense collaborative effort. The government went hard and early on the health response, and I think they also went hard and early on the economic response as well, and we're just a small part of that jigsaw puzzle. And I think I've got a presentation here somewhere, have I? Yes? Oh? That would be interesting. Aha, there you go. Yeah, I think I've got a big button that says back and next, so I can probably navigate that. Look, first of all, I was asked to talk about the digitisation of trade, and I will get there, okay, I promise. But I just want to start a bit more broadly, because I think it's a pretty interesting world at the moment, pretty interesting place. So I just wanted to give you a few perspectives on that. So first of all, just the whole global context. You might have noticed we're in the middle of this pandemic. We've still got a long way to go yet, and I think someone said to me at the beginning of this thing, if you think you know what's going to happen, you haven't been paying attention. And it's a bit like that. This thing is rolling and rolling and rolling, and we don't know where it's going to go or for how long. So don't go thinking there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I just don't think it's healthy to think like that. You're better off to sort of hunker down and deal with what's in front of us. 200 million cases, 4 million people have passed away. That Delta strain, the rates of infection are the highest they've ever been at the moment. But of course, we've got the whole vaccination taking place in different parts of the world. 3 billion vaccinations so far, so there's definitely vaccination. It is happening. And that really is the game changer, and we're seeing different country strategies. We're almost at one end of the spectrum, us and a small cluster of countries that are sort of in the elimination club. We're probably the most successful eliminators, and then you have the others in the living with club, of which the UK is the most interesting experiment at the moment, as they're opening up their economy because their vaccination rates are rising, but also so is their infection cases are rising as well. So we're watching the UK just to see how that all sort of pans out. But what we are seeing is just a huge rate of disruption of almost everything. And of course, disruption is not necessarily a bad word. I think, of course, I'm not saying the pandemic's not a bad thing. It is absolutely a catastrophic thing because of the human toll and sacrifice. But from a business and trade point of view, there's lots of threats and there's also lots of opportunities as well. And just for us, you can see our little map up there. That's our international offices. You can see who's disrupted in some way, either completely locked down or maybe some working from home, but some level of severe dislocation, and who's a more regularised, normalised work. And you see there it's just really China and us who are living anything like that regularised life. Everybody is disrupted in some way. And I must say it's been pretty extraordinary to say for us how our people have stayed switched on to our customers, New Zealand exporters, during the time of the pandemic. And the quite interesting thing is they've actually loved it to be connected with their customers during the time of the pandemic. It's almost been, they've loved that engagement with their own work. The other point is just sort of like a comment on New Zealand, back on the ranch. Yeah, New Zealand in some ways doing okay. I mean, forecast 4% GDP growth, 4.7% unemployment, which is only slightly ahead of what we were pre-pandemic. Some of the earliest Treasury forecasts and the devastation of those forecasts didn't come to pass. In fact, the whole thing has been managed or occurred in a way that was better than we all thought. Even the debt we've arrived at looks to be manageable as well. Across the export sector, that's what we call our heat map. We've done that 4 times throughout the pandemic. We just take the 1,400 customers that we're high intensity focused on. You can see the green bar there is getting bigger over time. The green bar says that the company is thriving in some way or seeing a net positive out of it. The origin reds are struggling or being devastated by it. So it's a pretty interesting picture. It's still roughly 50-50, but what it means is it's not all bad. And in the struggling category, in the thriving category, there's a lot going on. I mean, they've actually got very strong commodity prices at the moment. And so, some of the meat companies, dairy, kiwi fruit, they're being hammered by other parts of the crisis, but they're actually doing quite well at the moment. A lot of tech companies are out there solving problems for companies all over the world, and new problems, and our fast and agile tech companies have got after those problems and managed to find a little niche to grow in. So that's been quite a phenomenon. On the struggling part, the one I think that's come sort of later on, but it's probably the hottest and the heaviest now, is the supply of labour. Whether that is lesser skilled labour coming into doing the picking work in the horticultural sector, or whether it's project managers or nurses. I think, as the Minister said, we've all been reminded and seen how dependent this economy is on labour, and we're feeling that effect across the entire shop at the moment. In the supply chain, that's been with us from the start. It's the first hit as an aviation dilemma. The government came along and underpinned the aviation sector with the air freight capacity scheme, but now it's in the shipping. It's been in the shipping for quite some time. The market is really struggling to respond, so box rates have got up between sort of 300 and 400%. We've got too many empty containers in New Zealand, and then people can't get empty containers. We've got ships that won't come down from one hemisphere to the next. The thing is really, really struggling just to cope with the dislocation. A supply chain runs on flow, and the whole flow has been disrupted. So that's not going to go away for quite some time. The shipping system globally is at capacity. Shipping itself is a commodity, so it's got to go away and find more capacity, which means build ships. So we're now starting to build ships for the first time in a long time. But that means you've got to wait for ships to be built. So it really is quite a disrupted system. I was talking to a machine manufacturer last night, actually, and he was telling me that he's got in his machine he's got 180 microchips that he uses for that machine. He's got a gap of 35 microchips on his instrument board. In other words, that's how many microchips he's short of. So it's not just an export problem; it's an import problem as well. And microchips and microprocessors are really one of the really most severe gaps that we're seeing internationally. And then, of course, just the effect of the border itself, getting out and coming back. Of course, you can go out and you can come back. The Minister's just done it. It's just getting that MIQ capacity, so you need a really fast finger. Book that MIQ capacity. Probably it's starting to matter a bit more now, though, because as the rest of the world it's not really opening up out there. As the Minister said, when you go out there, people have got their masks on and the streets are empty. It's not like everyone's out there starting to trade, but there's more starting to happen. And that the more it happens overseas and people stop having virtual trade shows and they start expecting to see their suppliers, our relative disadvantage increases, and that's starting to happen now. Our relative disadvantages are increasing because our customers are wanting to see us in market. And so then, going out and then navigating MIQ on the way back, that's going to be really important. So we're I think this part of the dilemma is going to get bigger and bigger. So then just get into the trade recovery strategy itself. And I want to, again, start a bit more broadly and then narrow down into this. As I said before, the government went hard and early on its economic response as well as its health response. But before we go there, I just want to sort of step out and just sort of step back to the underlying sort of economic strategy that we've been sitting on almost for well over a decade now. And that basic idea is that we're a small, very young, 1,000 years ago it was just birds. So we're a young country at the edge of the South Pacific, and we know that we can't get rich by selling to ourselves. So we know that we have to engage with the world. The population of 5 million people, we're not going to be able to, not enough big enough market for ourselves and not enough investment in ourselves. Really key dilemmas. So we knew that we had to go out and trade with the world. We also know that the economy was originally built, or the export economy was initially built as a farm for the UK and for Australia. So a big reliance on these commodities of wool and meat and wood and dairy. And so we're in the middle of a big historic transformation of our economy away from those fundamental dependencies. Those big engines are still there and they're very, very important engines for the economy. But we are in transformation away from those towards more high value activities. So, within food and beverage, high value food and beverage emerging as big categories, new food and beverage brands. The tech sector, a decade ago it wasn't much, now well over $10 billion. The manufacturing, our low cost commodity manufacturing really got cleaned out in the 1980s in the big deregulation. What we're left with now is really highly skilled, specialised advanced manufacturing. And of course the service sector has grown massively. So we've got a much more high value economy. And so that transformation is something that we're underway, and what governments try to do in the strategy is just to keep on accelerating that transformation. And that's not only a transformation of what we make, as the Minister says, it's a transformation of the markets we go to as well. So as you'll see in a minute, we tend to start hunting for those more high value markets, those markets which has got higher GDP per person, because that's where we find the premiums for a lot of these high value products. So that strategy underpins our economic approach, and you have to see COVID through the light of that strategy. And of course, those three words there, productivity, sustainability, inclusion, those are the three sort of big pillars of the strategy the government used to express, that's their language, to express the strategy that we're applying. Now, then along comes this global pandemic, and we knew we had to step up big time because the wheels were falling off. So huge credit to MFAT, Vangelis, Vitalis was absolutely amazing. He stepped up and started to organise the international part of this response. And so as part of that, there was trade agreements and the trade relationships that the ministers talked about, but we also knew we had to get behind exporters a bit more as well. And Sancha will be talking about this a bit later on. So the ministers used their wizardry and flushed out $216 million over 4 years, thank you, Minister, for us to be able to step up our effort. I'm not going to go into all that now, but just to say that we've got a high intensity group of companies that we focus on. That was 700, originally was 500, now 700, now 1,400. So we could double up the amount of companies that we could afford to support. And that's over the total number of exporters in New Zealand of 12,000. We then also were able to invest in a light touch digital outreach. It's called My NZTE. If you go there, you can get all sorts of stuff, market insights, eventing, access to lots of knowledge. There's a nod here in the front here. We're just slowly building up all the content on that channel, so you can select your market, select your business, and it will start self-serving all sorts of content. That's been a big build so we can get out to a lot more customers. The investment fund we've got, it's gone from 30 million to 60 million, so that's also a double up. That allows us to co-invest with companies as they go into markets. We put a lot more people into markets, so 50 more people have gone in around the world. Our people in the markets, you saw the map before, they follow where the customers go. What's been really, really interesting during COVID is that the markets that have grown the most for us and the number of companies is the USA and Australia, and in East Asia, Singapore, Japan, Korea. Those are the markets that are growing. China is actually, you've seen a lot more revenue coming out of China for New Zealand, but it's because the commodity prices are so high. The number of companies going in there has not really increased that much. So we're definitely seeing through COVID a different pattern of engagement with the world as companies go towards these sort of high GDP, more premium markets. Of course, Australia, it's our closest neighbour in the middle of a pandemic. People sort of went to Australia a lot more than they have been before. So quite a change in the pattern of participation. On the services side, our first service response was freight forwarding. We knew nothing about it. But all of a sudden the air freight system collapsed. The Ministry of Transport just needed a while to secure capacity from other airlines, so we just entered the freight forwarding business, and I think we underwrote 300 flights. So that was good just for a couple of months, and then the full air freight capacity scheme came in. Business continuity and cash, we did about 600 of those, cash clinics. And now, the big demand is on the supply chain advisory, and then you'll see in a minute the digital advisory, coaching for how to go onto these e-commerce platforms, for a reason for which become obvious in a second. So, from those experiences, I now just want to move into thinking a bit about, what are some of the trends that are going on in the world? What are we actually seeing? And there's so much that we could talk about here, and I'm not going to talk about, I'm just going to pick out a few. The things I'm sort of not talking about that I probably could have had more time is what's going on in China, the move to independence in China, independence in their food and other parts of the manufacturing system. It's got a formal name called dual circulation. That's a big, big trend, and it's not just China, but other countries are moving. COVID has forced people to become more independent in their production to each other, of themselves. The other one is the big suspension of the just-in-time international trading system, particularly in manufacturing. This was very, depending what particular line and part of the supply chain you're in, very finely tuned just-in-time system built up over a generation. A big chunk of that has been suspended, so I won't talk about that either. So what I do when I talk about is what some of these new niches that are emerging. I'm just going to pick out food and beverage here for a second for the next couple of slides, but we could also have a similar sort of insight around tech and a similar insight around manufacturing. I guess the point about us here is that as the world gets disrupted, there are new things starting to emerge. And so just to read this quite complicated graph here, what it says is that we're seeing new premium niches emerging. So if you look at that graph there, you see, take for example Singapore, and this is the food and beverage consumption and preference for consumption. You see the attributes on the far right there. I put a red circle around it because you see there in Singapore, the two bottom categories, the blue is it's called on trend. That's people who prefer environmental products, and the next one is the yellow one, that's people who prefer ethical products. And the share of occasions is how many of all the shopping occasions they have, how many occasions are driven by either environmental or ethical considerations. The next bar beside it is a really interesting one. That's the share of spend. And so the difference between those two bars is the premium. And that's the really interesting part. So what we're seeing in Singapore, Australia, and the USA, premiums emerging for ethical and environmental production. And it comes back to the question before on sustainability. Whereas if you look in China, they will, a number of their share occasions they will have for environmental and ethical, but there's no desire to pay more for it. And so for a business model for the country, we're hunting those markets where the premiums are. And so this pattern, I mean, there's always been a preference for environmental ethical products. That's been there for quite some time. But what we're waiting for is to see the premiums emerge for them. And what we're seeing through the pandemic is the premiums emerging for these environmental and this ethical spending. And there's something going on in the world at the moment about people's mindset, about health, and about the environment. The pandemic seems to have accelerated these underlying trends. The interesting thing about this for the country is that if you think about if you're a food and beverage business and you're building up a company with ethical and environmental credentials, it costs something. You know, you're going to have to put more in. Your operations manual, unless you're just greenwashing and putting a nice sort of green swish on your brand, if you're actually doing it in an environmental way, it's going to cost you money. So your costs of production are going to go up. If you can't recoup that in the market with higher margins, you'll be basically eroding your business. So this trend is absolutely essential if we want sustainability to be a source of a competitive advantage for the country. And what we're seeing in the pandemic is some of these types of margins starting to appear. So that's the first point. In the middle of this pandemic, new niches are starting to emerge. And I said you could do the same for manufacturing and the same for tech. And just, take that a step forward then. This is a homegrown picture. Didn't get it out of a book. But it's based on our experience. We think this is what's happening in the world again, just talking about food and beverage. So we think there's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs starting to appear in food and beverage in the world. And you have those countries on the bottom of that hierarchy who just want food. You have protein, carbohydrates, and you put like an Africa in that category. Then you see the emergence of countries that want healthy food. They really care what they ingest. You definitely put China in that category. Then you want people who want healthy and sustainable food. And then you go to Europe and USA and Australia, put them in that category. Then you get the top of the pyramid where the premiums are highest and the high value products and services are those who want to regenerate the environment through what they are consuming. And then you go to like San Francisco or Berlin or London. And so this hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs applied to consumption of food globally says a lot and informs a lot of our country strategy and where we think we need to be opening up markets, where we need free trade agreements. Please, MFAT, give us some free trade agreement in the USA. That's the one we really need. So, and I know that's very hard, so I'm just joking. But you can see how these driven from these deep consumer insights where we think we need to land up. Because ultimately, if we go right back to the underlying economic strategy, we are building a value-based economy. Jobs rich, low carbon, diverse economy that's hunting value globally across a diverse range of markets. To do that, you've got to be finding these consumer niches that can pay for that. And during COVID, we're seeing the rapid appearance of a whole lot of new consumer niches. So then just going to the topic I was asked to speak about, which was, in the middle of all this, then you've got these e-commerce channels starting to emerge. And this is another area of big disruption. So just look at the graph on the right there. You're right. You can see, e-commerce trend was there. We all know about it, accelerating before, or just trending before COVID. But look what happened with the blue circle around it during COVID. Just bango, just a big leap up. And you see the graph on the left there. You can see China's been leading the pack on e-commerce for quite some time. They've got that big Alibaba and JD.com, multi-billion dollar institutions and companies that have built up this big e-commerce participation. But you see some of the other countries, we've got the UK now, huge leap up. And then global, a leap up as well, USA leap up as well. So this trend is definitely accelerated. This is not going away. It's not going away because during COVID, consumer behaviour got accelerated. I mean, it was obvious what's happened here, right? People are locked at home. They need to buy online to get food delivered. And this isn't just food, this is all retail. So that's the driver. But what's then happened is people got used to e-commerce platforms and e-commerce participation. People have solved the problems of the last mile, which is between just the distribution centres and the front door. Companies have stood up and built infrastructure there. There's new warehousing, new vehicle fleets in place. In fact, whole new companies have emerged. So it's a very busy area. So this e-commerce trend is not going away, and we have to think about how to participate in it, because it's both threat and opportunity. It can be totally treacherous and it can be totally torched. If I ask people to put their hands up who's been torched by an e-commerce platform, about half the hands will go up. So who hasn't been torched or has got opportunity out of it, half the hands will go up. It's really quite challenging. So for us at NZTE, we've had to really kind of step into this. So what are some of the responses there? We call it, there's like a low E readiness. A lot of our manufacturing sector were, the basic sort of style was to get out into the market and know your distributors personally. A lot of the distributors are sort of family owned. Get to know them, dad, the son, the daughters. All those quite intimate personal relationships. It's face-to-face selling, trade shows playing a big part of it and so forth. This is a complete shift in that model. So, we are running a lot of digital clinics. So at NZTE, we've got quite a big private sector advisory workforce around us. We've got we call them beachheads advisors, sort of 50-odd beachheads advisors in New Zealand. These are private sector people that we commission to help our customers. We've got them on retainer, fantastic group of people, but also we really lean into the professional service firms as well. Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, EY, lots of other private consultancies. So we try to crowd in as many of that advisory as we can. So with that type of mindset, we've run 416 clinics over the last little while. It's got one example, like an organic baby food company founder walked out of one of the clinics the other day, found himself a new brand manager, a new chief digital officer, and set himself up a new digital strategy, a new data strategy. E-commerce platforms, so much is it about data and understanding of data and having a big data shop at the back end of your business. So people are really responding and are slowly climbing that capability curve. Other thing we did was, under that attracting customers, is we launched this Made with Care campaign. So I think about this as air cover. So this is sort of broad storytelling. What was different about the Made with Care campaign was when it originated from Tourism New Zealand. Tourism New Zealand said, well, actually, we need to keep the New Zealand tourism brand alive in international markets, but we can't have a campaign that says, come and visit New Zealand for obvious reasons. And so we looked at that and decided that actually food and beverage can actually carry the voice of New Zealand in international markets. It actually has got a lot of the same values. Care tiaki or kaitiaki, that was the essence of that campaign. We're a country that cares for people and planet over generations. That's a big part of the tourism story, and it's a big part of our food and beverage story. So the Made with Care campaign, videos and stuff, interviewing all sorts of people around New Zealand, pitched up in a bit of a quirky way. You had to do a slightly cheeky one for the Aussies and a highly respectful one for Japan. We've got sort of customised a bit, and it went out across these markets. Huge 35 million reach to it. Got opened up 188 million times, so quite good reach. To the 5 target markets, the last bit of research we did showed that it had an impact of lifting awareness about New Zealand food and beverage 10% across the US market, which is absolutely huge. So quite a good campaign, but it's only air cover. You don't sell by just telling stories. You've got to have something there. Then you get on to the next one, which is these platforms. And these platforms are both agony and ecstasy for New Zealand. These are really big e-commerce machines. You got the Alibaba and the Amazon and even a Lazada, which is owned by Alibaba. Different country has got their different dominant platforms, and just trying to learn how to participate on their platforms and extract value. So all the commercial arrangements you need to have in place, how you build your capability, how you get access to your own data, all those things really, really matter. So it comes back to the sort of capability building and then forming partnerships with these platforms. So we spend a lot of time with these platform owners trying to get a specific strategy for each one of these platforms. I've been asked a few times, say, oh, why don't we build a platform for New Zealand? just don't underestimate the billions and billions of investment that's gone into these platforms, particularly with their reach. So Alibaba reaches 1.4 billion people in China. So they haven't got that because they've done a TV ad campaign. They have got literally thousands of people employed to build up the technology platform and then the reach of the platform. That's why you pay 10% or so to go on and use that platform. So these are new channels as alternatives to supermarkets or complementary to supermarkets. Of course, Horeca, we call it, hotels, restaurants and cafes. That's all looking pretty ugly in markets at the moment, so it's definitely a big alternative to that in the current environment. One little example there, we've got the food basket. The food basket is a private collaboration of companies, about 14 companies. This is my words, not their words. I call it the peacock strategy. Peacock strategy is that you fluff your feathers up and make yourself look a bit bigger than you actually are. So when you go to market, you look like you're bigger with more presence, which is really important when you go onto these platforms. In fact, I often advise New Zealand companies to be peacocks because a lot of us are quite small, but you fluff your feathers up and make yourself just a little bit bigger than we actually are, because that scale and presence actually matters. So the food basket, bit of a peacock strategy, 14 companies, and we're funding them to sort of drag in another 10 or so companies onto that platform to build themselves up. They collaborate as a group of companies and figure out how to go on to a sort of country store on Alibaba and can extract more value out of that platform. And then on the right-hand column there, it's just, these big, multinational companies, Google and Facebook and so forth. We need to stay abreast of them. They're massive machines. They've got huge control over data. So trying to get close to them, building up, data relationships, navigating all the privacy there, and capability building relationships as well. Because there's no doubt the really good companies that are in e-commerce have really learned how to master their own sort of Facebook relationships and their own e-commerce platform relationships. So there you go. That's my sort of tour around. Just in summary, what I've said is that it's a severely disrupted world. The government's invested heavily in these public-private partnerships. There's a lot more support around than there was 18 months ago. What COVID has done is accelerated a lot of things that were pre-existing, and with that comes threats, but there also comes opportunities as well. So for the fleet of foot, the spatially aware and the agile, there are opportunities there. Collectively, I think there's a lot more value that's there. We've got to hunt for value, and I think this collaborating to compete is very important. And I'm very confident that I'm actually quite optimistic that our participation can generate solutions that are not only good for New Zealand, but are good for the world. So those are my words. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.